Nobel Wolf and his 10-person hunting party were returning from a routine hunt, just like they did every day. Upon closer inspection, the makeshift claws they had grabbed for hunting were evident. They lacked durable armor to protect themselves from the wild animals in the forest. Typically, they used the hides and bones of the animals they hunted for their clothing and gear. Strategically, it wasn't all that bad. Traveling with light gear for the hunt made them more agile during the chase. Under Nobel Wolf's command and organized in shifts, 2 teams of 10 people each took turns conducting day-long hunting expeditions outside the village, into the dark, dangerous, and wild forest. When they returned, they brought fresh meat, hides, furs, bones, and fruits with them. The village square wasn't very large. It was small enough for all 300 residents to reach each other. With a short walk, it was surrounded on 3 sides by impassable, magical mountains, with one side facing the dark forest they hunted in. They had never measured the size of the forest. They had only been able to explore as far as they could go from sunrise to sunset. They knew they stood no chance against the wild animals that even injured their most skilled hunters during the day, let alone in the darkness of night. The river that flowed through the village turned into waterfalls in places. They divided the meat of wild animals like bears and tigers, along with the gem-like fruits they gathered from the forest trees around the bridge over the river in the square, and distributed them to the other wolves living in the village. Unfortunately, not all the wolves in the colony were fit for hunting. The wolf transformation disease had left many people weakened here. Some, though strong, had been severely injured during hunts and could no longer hunt. The disease had left most of the colony weakened and bedridden, but for some, after painful processes, it had made them stronger, more agile, and more perceptive. Among the few individuals struck by the disease in a positive way, especially those whose heads and necks were covered with fur and possessed long, sharp, wild-looking teeth, they had acquired physical and mental strengths that normal humans in the regular world couldn't attain. The hunter, who had joined the second hunting party and was currently resting, rushed over to Nobel Wolf as soon as he returned from the hunt, bringing news that they needed to go speak with the sages. "I can't go to them right away. We need to quickly gather the game and supplies on the bridge and distribute them. Besides, I need to clean up and rest," Nobel Wolf replied. The messenger remarked, "The sages seemed a bit tense, Commander. I don't think they want to discuss the day's hunting or the village's general affairs." Nobel Wolf listened to the messenger, but he was so tired, exhausted, and dirty that he simply said, "All right, I'll stop by after I've freshened up a bit," and continued walking towards the square, following behind his hunting companions. Meanwhile, the messenger headed off to inform the sages of the situation. When they reached the bridge, they distributed the spoils of the hunt. Nobel Wolf informed the werewolves in the party that the sages had summoned him and he needed to go, assuming it was just routine assignments. The hunting party bid farewell to each other and to Nobel Wolf. Then, each shouldered their loads and made their way to their respective shelters, distributing their shares to the other werewolves along the way. Nobel Wolf cleaned off the blood, mud, dust, and splinters of grass and trees that had stuck to him during the hunt, with the water from the stream running through the village's center before resting. In this village, the tents were made by combining the fur, leather, and bones left over from the hunted animals. Despite appearing weak and useless, they truly protected against the night's chill. Still, he couldn't forget the cold they endured on the nights before they set up their tents. When they first arrived in these lands, although he stretched out to his bed to rest, he had dozed off lightly and had begun to see the nightmares he had experienced in the last few days again. When the nightmares began in the darkness, he saw the blue dragon god, whom no one had seen before, looking at him. The losses he suffered in the war with humans, his wife, his mother, and father. In the nightmare, he tasted pain, sorrow, grief, anger, all the destructive emotions. However, lately, while the nightmares continued, he sometimes felt completely overwhelmed by wild emotions. He lost the abilities of imagining, designing, and managing himself that humans possessed and that distinguished them from wild animals. And he wanted to tear apart anything that came in his way and shed blood. He had occasionally experienced nightmares about his family, since they settled in this magical, mysterious, and concealed village. But the feeling of savagery was new, and when he succumbed to this feeling, he couldn't wake up of his own volition. It was clear that something was going wrong. The person bringing the news had again now arrived in front of his tent and called out, "Nobel Wolf, are you in there?" Towards the inside of the tent, Nobel Wolf, though not fully rested, was thankfully no longer in an uncontrolled state, lost in the depths of his nightmares. He got up and stepped out of the tent. "Come in," he said. When they returned to the village after the hunt, it was midday. As he stepped outside, he noticed that the sky was beginning to darken. "The sages are expecting you for dinner. They said the matter is very important and instructed you to leave whatever you're doing and come," said the messenger. "All right, if they're insisting for the second time, something must be amiss. You may leave now. I'm heading there immediately. You need to be with the hunting party tomorrow as well. The animals in the forest and mountains are becoming increasingly savage. Hardly anyone returns home without injury from the team anymore. Go and rest. We need to meet early at the bridge tomorrow. Prepare the party and head into the forest. The village's provisions are running low these days. The animals we hunt and the supplies we gather don't last long anymore. We need to increase the frequency of our hunts," replied Nobel Wolf. "Of course, Nobel Wolf. I hope the problem the sages will discuss is not as big as the concern on their faces. See you tomorrow," said the departing wolf who brought the news. Nobel Wolf set off towards the tent of the sages. The village center wasn't very large to begin with, so it didn't take long for him to reach the sage wolves. Sage Myung-horang had been waiting in front of his tent for quite some time, lost in past memories, until he saw Nobel Wolf approaching. As soon as the messenger, who had been tasked with delivering the news to Nobel Wolf, left his side, Myung-horang began to anxiously await his arrival before sunset. His tent and the area in front of it were slightly larger than the others in the village. The largest tent had at its peak the skull of the largest animal they had hunted in these magical lands. Above it flew a flag made of animal skin, bearing the names of those who had died in hunts. Though it may seem like a small thing, it was the grandest way to honor their losses and pay tribute to their spirits in these lands. In the small square in front of the tent, there were provisions, fruits, and hearths upon returning from the hunt. Nobel Wolf and the hunters who were out that day would usually gather here, with the sages enjoying meals. Sometimes they reminisced about the past. Sometimes they discussed the situation of those living in the village. And sometimes they evaluated the course of events. Today, Sage Myung-horang was curious about how Nobel Wolf would react to the news he was about to share. The fate of all humans had effectively fallen into the hands, or rather, the claws of a person who had fallen ill and turned into a wolf. He began to think about how this curse began, his lost loved ones, friends, home, and homeland. Memories and thoughts began to pass through his mind as he watched the sunset shaped by the artificial magic in this world. The village was all male when the disease began to spread. A dynasty emerged from among them, strangely consisting of sages, great commanders, and researchers, becoming the most affected community by this virus. The men of this dynasty, known as Hun-an, were directly affected, while the women were indirectly affected by this disease, known for loyalty, courage, wisdom, valor, reliability, and generosity. This dynasty had effectively been wiped out during this process, not wiped out, but rather transformed into wolves. When cursed Metin Stones began to rain down on the human world, famine ensued, and the surrounding animals became savage. Moreover, a disease emerged that not only made the men of the dynasty hairy, like wolves, but also elongated their teeth, sharpened them, and transformed their hands into claws. Those who were not part of this dynasty, but were affected by the disease, were very few, actually. The majority of people were unaffected by the disease. In the known world, there were approximately 10 million people living. In nearby lands, there were about 2 million. And in the territories of the dynasties, there were about 1 million people. The Hun-an Dynasty was a small community, with only about 5,000 members. Of these, 2,000 were men, 2,000 were women, and about 1,000 were still children. The lycanthropy disease had already spread rapidly. Among the men of the dynasty, however, they had a tradition that prioritized virtue and honor. This series of events that surpassed human nature had not severed family ties. Even if their husbands and fathers turned into wolves, the women did not give up on the men of their family since the beginning of the disease. They had maintained their loyalty. Male children had become more dependent on care than ever before. Although the women of the dynasty did not know exactly what the disease was and how it could be cured, they continued to care for their families, hoping that their fathers, husbands, brothers, and children, slowly turning into two-legged wolves due to the disease, would recover without ever losing hope. Since the onset of the disease, women had become unable to do anything other than taking care of their patients. In the valley between the mountains, where the Hun-an Dynasty was settled, this difficult process unfolded. However, rumors began to spread in the territories of the dynasties, which consisted of dynasties of different sizes. Instead of associating the cause of the disease that came after the Metin Stones started falling with the curse spread by these stones, it began to be discussed that it was the curse of the people who fell ill and turned into wolves that brought the curse upon themselves. The curse causing the famine in the human world and the increasing savagery of the animals actually originated from the Metin Stones, raining down from the skies by the dragon self-proclaimed as God, the blue dragon. Metin Stone actually meant both text stone and durable stone in the ancient language. The name Metin Stone was given not because of a text written on it, but because it meant durable stones in these lands. The stones, the size of a human, fell to the ground at great speed. These stones, filled with dark magic and spells, turned into balls of fire as they fell, and their burning flames did not stop even after they fell, never extinguishing the gloomy smoke emanating from them. They withered the grass and trees within a radius of 500 to 600 steps, and made the animals excessively savage. Due to this situation, people could neither cultivate properly nor hunt without being injured or attacked. The cursed Metin Stones which took bizarre shapes until they fell from the sky, never ceased their cursed effects even after they fell, without being shattered by the warriors at the place they fell. Although the term Metin stone meant durable hard stones, sometimes actual texts were found inside them. People already knew from the ancient language written on the pages that came out of the stones that these cursed stones were sent by the blue dragon. In the territories of other dynasties, after a series of meetings, rumors, and heated debates, a decision was made to launch a brutal assault against the Hun-an Dynasty. Somehow, they had convinced themselves that those afflicted with the disease within the Hun-an Dynasty were the cause of the curses raining down upon them. The people, already grappling with scarcity, deprivation, and hunger, resolved to wipe out the Hun-an Dynasty, blaming them for the afflictions and adversities they faced. They were willing to do so, even at the expense of those who had not yet fallen ill, including women and children who remained with them. Some individuals, boasting of their prowess as warriors but lacking the power to confront the blue dragon directly, felt compelled to prove themselves. To maintain their titles, they saw fit to mercilessly slay those unfortunate souls who had succumbed to the disease. It was a cruel and heartless act, driven by desperation and fear. Many gathered to prepare for the onslaught. Meanwhile, cunning individuals had already begun advancing towards the outskirts of the Hun-an settlement, either alone or in small groups, driven by the desire for spoils. They had to traverse the surrounding mountains before reaching the valley where the Hun-an people lived. Unaware of the impending danger, some of the Hun-an inhabitants were innocently gathering provisions, wood, and medicinal herbs for their sick in the mountains above their valley. They were attacked without warning, their lives cut short by the ruthless bandits, who showed no mercy in their quest for plunder. As they progressed towards the settlement of the dynasty, these relentless attackers faced resistance from some of the residents before meeting their demise. Those who survived managed to learn the motives behind the attacks, realizing that the dynasty was facing an even greater peril than they had imagined. The survivors who managed to return conveyed this information to the sages of the dynasty. What could 5,000 individuals do against the backdrop of hundreds of thousands, especially when plagued by a disease that transformed people into wolves? The process of transformation was agonizing, spent mostly in bed. It was impossible to engage in any attack or defense with these individuals, especially while in the clutches of a disease that turned them into wolves. According to the calculations of the sages, they had only a few days left. Large groups of people couldn't reach this area swiftly. Those remaining robust soldiers could eventually manage to halt these marauders on their own. They swiftly prepared the fastest horses and contacted the sages of the other great dynasties in half a day. Messengers, with knowledge of the secret shortcuts beneath the unknown mountains, brought the news and the response. The letter outlined how they could cope with this situation. The sages of the other dynasties had managed to create a hidden, mysterious world using the power of magic and sorcery that came with the curse of the Metin Stones. Initially, they conceived this world to save all of humanity from the curse of the blue dragon. Apparently, humans had already begun destroying each other before the arrival of the blue dragon. When the major dynasties received the news, they couldn't turn a blind eye to the demise of this respected and humble dynasty that had provided them with significant help. They conveyed all the necessary information in the letter. The sages and people of the Hun-an Dynasty were unaware of this development, due to their focus on the patients. According to the contents of the letter, once they entered this world created by the spell, the way back was yet unknown. Finally, the letter mentioned that this magic was potent for humans, A group of at least 10 people could activate it. However, upon the realization of this magic, the resulting nightmares, external impacts such as explosions, heat, and tornadoes would painfully kill the spellcasters. The necessary materials, as mentioned in the letter, could be obtained by cutting a few cursed Metin stone pieces. However, for the sacrificial individuals, the sages needed to convene a council meeting. It was decided that those nearing death, who couldn't survive in the new life filled with immense hardships, would perform the magic. Despite appearing selfish, the decision was made in the interest of the dynasty and its people, not individual interests. The 10 individuals approached with the offer, fully informed of the situation, immediately accepted the task. There was no need to approach an 11th. Meanwhile, the materials were gathered and assembled as instructed in the letter. As soon as the 10 people formed a circle, shoulder to shoulder, over the materials, they began to chant the magical words. Once the ancient magical incantations were spoken, pieces collected from the cursed stones emitted black soot and foul-smelling fumes. Despite coughing and struggling to breathe within the smoke, the 10 individuals continued chanting the magical words. Kiki Paukar, Lor Lor Kuner, Alak Torpak Tar, Gai Gai Fafuler, Dur Dur Jur Jur Nanakar. After several attempts, a crimson explosion occurred within the smoke. Those nearby immediately rushed forward to disperse the smoke with their hands and arms. They soon realized that the 10 selfless individuals had already perished, and the explosion had torn their bodies apart. Some parts of their bodies had spreaded away, arms and legs had turned into rope-like strands, and in some cases, limbs were missing altogether. Observing the scene, the sages concluded that those who couldn't complete the magical incantation due to the smoke had disrupted the energy circle. They believed that the teleportation had been interrupted, leading to such a phenomenon. Once again, albeit this time covering their mouths with veils and cloths, they began discussing how to accomplish this with the sickly 10 individuals. However, the time taken for horses to carry letters back and forth, the collection of materials, and the execution of the ritual had extended past midnight. Before the council could reach a consensus, torches began flickering like a herd of stars on the peaks of the mountains. But how could this be? Even in times of war, it took armies days to traverse these mountains on horseback. Driven to exhaustion by the curse of the blue dragon, people finally found someone to scapegoat through malicious instigators of discord. These people had swiftly transformed into incredibly devout, determined, and resolute individuals, united in their hatred to kill everyone in the Hun-an Dynasty until not a single member remained. They traversed the 2-day journey in just one. Fueled by animosity, descent from the mountains to the valley took no more than 1 or 2 hours. But what if the magic failed again? As everyone pondered the disastrous consequences of unanswered questions, Nobel Wolf's family stepped forward. They were also esteemed members of the Council of Sages. Their lineage was highly respected, and now, in addition to all the sacrifices they had made, they were willing to give up their lives for their friends, neighbors, and perhaps humanity itself. Nobel Wolf, the sole prince of the family, had recently married his childhood sweetheart. However, shortly after their wedding, he too had undergone the transformation into a wolf. Nevertheless, like throughout the dynasty, his wife continued to love him and remain loyal to him in this form. His father, mother, uncles, and aunts were present. As the Omem family, we wish to undertake this task. Our only condition is that you take care of our son and daughter-in-law, ensuring the continuity of our lineage, they said. The other sages understood that an entire family would be lost. But there was no time to think. debate, or express gratitude. New materials needed to be gathered from the Metin Stones just outside the village. Every man, woman, and child was mobilized. Just as they reached the Metin Stones, the frenzied mob caught up to them. Skirmishes erupted quickly. They were killing the men, even the boys. The women and girls were crammed into cages made of wooden planks on their carts. They shouted that these would make excellent slaves. When the group that managed to gather materials from the Metin Stones returned, they began recounting what had transpired on the battlefield. While they recounted the events, the materials they brought were rearranged in the center of the area. Forthwith, members of the Hun-an family lined up shoulder to shoulder around the materials, covering their mouths and noses, ready to begin the ritual. Nobel Wolf's wife, the woman destined to continue the family line, Lady Hatton, stood up as the magical words were about to be uttered. "O elders, O sages, I cannot leave the women of my dynasty to these ravenous ones. I am ready to die with them if necessary. While you sacrifice your lives here, I cannot stand still. Han, my lord, my husband, my prince, please forgive me. Perhaps our family, our lineage will perish, but our honor will remain. You also need to go to the magical lands with these people. We need a young, strong commander, even if you undergo the transformation into a wolf. I know your strength will not diminish, but rather increase. The dynasty needs a commander like you, and the women need a leader like me." She placed a kiss on Nobel Wolf's neck, which was covered in fur from his transformation. Then, she took the most powerful long-handled blade from the arsenal and charged towards the crowd. As Lady Hatton, dragging the blade behind her, it was so heavy that the steel tip nearly dug a trench as it scraped along the ground. But a warrior who managed to wield this blade could take down at least 10 people with a single blow. The blade was adorned with intricate decorations, from the tip dragging on the ground to the handle. These decorations were the last ornate things that anyone facing death with the blade, as heavy as a human, would see. At the end of the wooden handle, there was a metal sphere slightly larger than a palm to prevent it from slipping from the hand. When the blade, as heavy as a person, was hurled, seeing Lady Hatton wielding the blade, the other women in the area could not remain seated. They grabbed blades, swords, and bows, joining Lady Hatton as a women's army advancing. It happened so fast that women reached a distance where even shouting couldn't be heard before the council's shock wore off. The Hun-an family, despite hearing about the events, was now focused on the ritual. They began chanting the magical words again. The same black, sooty, and foul smoke emerged. This time the number of participants in the ritual was over 20, and they were healthier, stronger, and took precautions against the smoke by covering their faces, so the chain remained unbroken except for a few coughs and breathless moments. Kiki Paukar, lower Kuner, Alak Torpak Tar, Gai Fafuler, Dur Nanakar. The smoke grew larger, and it was evident that something different was happening this time. Some of the villagers who heard the news had gathered in the council area. The smoke from the stone fragments had grown to encompass all these people. Those in the area looked around at their loved ones, but there were already too many losses. Everything had happened so quickly that it was impossible to inform everyone of the situation. The black smoke suddenly turned red and began engulfing everyone's arms and legs, smothering them. As this smothering reached their heads and brains, they began to see nightmares. Although no one saw the blue dragon, they knew within their imaginative minds that the silhouette seen in these nightmares was the blue dragon. Fear, dread, and concern intensified within them until the red smoke exploded with a loud noise, transporting the people within the smoke to the new hidden world. Outside the village, unaware of the council's call, men, women, and the women who had risen from the council to join the battle continued to fight. The rest of the story was now impossible to know. The people in the council area had been magically transported to lands with flowing rivers, surrounded by mountains and forests, but not much different from the normal world. After arriving here, the destructive emotions growing within them disappeared, however. Even the experience of being transported had deeply shaken their souls. Continuing their lineage here was now impossible because none of the women were near the red cloud where the explosion occurred. During the teleportation, 15 years had passed since that day. Sage Myonghorung, waiting in front of his tent, was lost in memories and hadn't even noticed the sunset. When he saw Nobel Wolf approaching, he snapped out of her reverie. Looking beyond the horizon, he realized how long he had been standing there, admiring the magical sunset crafted by sorcery.